Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni is a name that carries so much weight across every corner of the Soul Society. For over 2000 years, this man stood as the undisputed peak of Shinigami combat power. No challenger had risen to claim his throne, and no Shinigami had surpassed him in raw strength, but yet Yhwach finally killed him during the 1000-year Blood War arc. And while doing so, he had the audacity to refer to Yamamoto as being weak. He claimed that the head captain was no longer on his list of war potentials, and that he had softened. And honestly, Yhwach wasn't entirely wrong here. The Yamamoto that we watched die wasn't the same Yamamoto who crushed the Quincy over 1000 years ago. Over the course of a millennia, the most feared warrior in the Soul Society became something else entirely. He took on the role of a protective grandfather figure, a man bound by honor and duty rather than pure unbridled violence. The original Gotei 13 knew a different Yamamoto, one who treated his own subordinates as expendable pawns. One who cared nothing for collateral damage as long as victory was achieved. So when we ask ourselves how strong Prime Yamamoto truly was, we're really asking just how terrifying was that monster before 1000 years of peace had dulled his blade. Defining what Prime means for a Shinigami is difficult because their power scales work differently than we might expect. For most warriors in fiction, Prime means peak physical condition, somewhere in their 20s or 30s when their bodies perform at maximum efficiency, but Shinigami don't work that way. Head Captain Yamamoto's battle data card from the BLEACH official guidebooks states that he scores a perfect 100 in attack, defense, mobility, Kido, intellect, but the one stat that he lacks in is stamina, where he scores 60 out of 100. It's clear that the reasoning for this is due to his old age, so yes, his body has deteriorated somewhat over the 1000 years. But here's where things get interesting. A Shinigami's relationship with their Zanbakuto deepens over time. The longer that you've wielded your blade, the more synchronized your connection becomes, the more control you gain over its abilities. Yamamoto wielded Ryujin Jaka for over 2000 years. That bond represents something immeasurable. When Yamamoto activated his Bankai against Yhwach, he asked him directly whether facing Zankai no Tachi again would be the same as it was 1000 years ago. There's an implication buried in that question, that his Bankai has evolved in that time. His mastery has grown even further. The version of Zankai no Tachi that Yhwach had witnessed during their first war wasn't the complete picture. Some have theorized that maybe Yamamoto had access to only 2 phases of Zankai no Tachi, which would have been Zankai no Tachi East and West, and over those 1000 years he was able to acquire Zankai no Tachi South and North. So you could actually argue that the Yamamoto we saw die in the 1000-year Blood War arc represents his technical prime, which is his most refined version. 2000 years of perfecting his craft, with him having complete mastery over every combat discipline known to Shinigami, a Bankai that had continually developed across centuries of existence. But fans don't mean technical prime when they discuss this topic, they mean something else entirely. They're talking about that version of Yamamoto who scores 600 out of 600 on his data stats. They're referring to Prime Yamamoto, the monster. Yhwach helped us to imagine what this is by painting a specific picture of who Yamamoto used to be. He described the head captain as a true demon of the sword, who would do whatever it takes to defeat his enemy. The deaths of his subordinates meant nothing to Prime Yamamoto, victory above all else, no hesitation, mercy, as this Yamamoto embodied pure violence channeled through the most powerful Zanbakuto in existence. The original Gotei 13 weren't noble protectors upholding justice, they were, in Yhwach's own words, defenders in name only. They were in fact a brutal mob of killers held together by a leader even more ruthless than they were. Yamamoto didn't recruit promising graduates from the academy to fill his ranks, because the academy didn't even exist at this point. Instead, he handpicked notorious criminals and infamous warriors based solely on their capacity for violence. Unohana Yachiro is a perfect example of this. She was once referred to as the most diabolical criminal in the history of the Soul Society. She has been given the title of the original Kenpachi, a master of over 8,000 different sword styles who murdered for sport. Yamamoto looked at this woman and said, "You belong in my organization." This is the Prime Yamamoto that we're dealing with. The anime gives us a glimpse of this era during those exclusive flashback sequences in the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime. Young Yamamoto leading his captains against Yhwach's Quincy army in the original battle against the Quincy. The sheer carnage that they unleashed, bodies piling into mountains, skulls crushed underfoot as Yamamoto walked across the battlefield, engulfed in the flames of his Bankai, Chojuro Sasakibe impaling Yhwach from behind while Yamamoto brought down his blade and covered the Quincy king in smoldering ash. Shunsui Kyoraku, the new captain commander, is someone who has witnessed multiple generations of the Gotei 13 across his long lifespan. He also considers the original Gotei 13 to be the strongest version of the organization that ever existed. Coming from someone who became head captain, that assessment carries some serious weight. There's a haunting flashback in the Thousand Year Blood War arc where we see a young Shunsui sneaking into Yamamoto's quarters and finding a painting. It's a dark silhouette of head captain Yamamoto engulfed in flames. When Shunsui asks about it, Yamamoto's response was chilling. He explains that the painting depicted a monster who appeared during a difficult time in the history of the Soul Society, and that monster only made things worse. He said that it was unlikely to return, but if it ever did, that would mark Yamamoto's final day in the Soul Society. Now, of course, he was referring to himself. Yamamoto kept a painting of his own past self as a constant reminder of what he used to be, or in actuality, what he could become again if he was pushed far enough. The monster wasn't some external threat, it was the version of Yamamoto which existed before peace softened him, before he developed honor and justice and empathy, before he started caring whether his subordinates lived or died. Even during the days when Shunsui was just a young boy, Yamamoto knew deep down that unleashing that monster again would destroy him. This connects directly to how Yamamoto's Bankai functions. Zanka no Tachi concentrates all of Ryujin Jaka's flames into the blade itself. The temperature of those flames reaches upwards of 15 million degrees Celsius, matching the core temperature of the sun. Unohana herself stated that if Yamamoto's Bankai remained active for too long, it would incinerate the entirety of the Soul Society. His power was fundamentally not designed for protection. Ryujin Jaka was forged for annihilation. It's a weapon fit for a beast, and the moment Yamamoto started caring about collateral damage, about protecting people instead of destroying enemies, his greatest asset became a liability. He could no longer fight without restraint. Yhwach's criticisms were all fairly valid. After the Quincy were defeated 1,000 years ago, the Soul Society entered an extended period of peace. For 1,000 years there was no threat that emerged which required Yamamoto's full power. The Shinigami developed bonds, they found things worth protecting, and they built a civilization rather than simply defending territory through violence. Yamamoto too changed with the Soul Society. Take for example his refusal to have Orihime heal his arm after sacrificing it against Aizen. You could say he was just being a stubborn old man, but Yhwach had seen things differently. He saw a head captain who wouldn't exploit humans for personal gain, who had developed ethical boundaries that the monster in the painting never possessed. The Yamamoto of 1,000 years ago would have done whatever it takes. He would have used Orihime's powers without a second thought. He would have thrown his own subordinates into the grinder if it meant that he'd win. Prime Yamamoto would have left his Zanka no Tachi running until the point that the entire Soul Society was destroyed. But the Yamamoto of today is somebody who simply will not resort to such measures. The fact that he cared made him predictable, easy to manipulate, and allowed for him to walk straight into a trap because his rage over Sasakibe's death had clouded his judgment. The cold-blooded demon who crushed the Quincy Empire 1,000 years ago, he would have recognized Royd Lloyd's impersonation, I'm sure, and he would have never exhausted his Bankai fighting a decoy. He would have approached the battlefield with more precision rather than emotional vengeance. We know from the No Breaths from Hell one-shot chapter that Yamamoto was cast into hell following the Konso Reisei ritual. This is something that's performed 12 years after a captain's death to release their reishi back into the soil, except instead of a peaceful dissolution, Yamamoto and the other deceased captains found themselves trapped in hell. He's already been given a new title there, called Founder of the Gotei. Hell transforms those who are within it, as we have seen with Zal Aparo. He has chain-like markings markings on his face along with horns and his hollow hole having moved to the outside of his body. Think about Yamamoto along with the original Gotei 13 captains who've presumably been rotting in hell for centuries. How much will of their appearances and personalities have been altered? There's also a chance that the Hell Arc could give us Prime Yamamoto. If the realm of hell alters the appearance of those who enter it, you could theorize that hell strips away time and suffering from anyone who enters it, transforming them into who they fundamentally once were, so Yamamoto could revert to his monstrous self, the demon of the sword who cared nothing for honor or justice. This is the Prime Yamamoto who defeated Yhwach, the one who nearly exterminated an entire race, and the one who Shunsui considered to represent the Gotei 13's absolute peak. Imagine a Hell Arc where Ichigo and the current generation of the Gotei 13 has to face off against these corrupted, fallen original Gotei 13 captains, with Prime Yamamoto leading them all. How strong was Prime Yamamoto really? Well, he's stronger than the vast majority of characters that we've seen fight on screen, but this is the frustrating truth. The glimpses that we've seen are via those anime-exclusive flashbacks, the descriptions provided by Yhwach, the aftermath of battles that we just didn't witness. They paint a picture of something beyond what the present-day Yamamoto displayed to us. Yes, his technical abilities may have been sharper in old age, 2000 years of experience does count for something, but the willingness to use those abilities without restriction, that died centuries ago. Prime Yamamoto would have activated Ennetsu Jigoku, his technique that creates pillars of flame powerful enough to destroy everything within the radius including himself without hesitation. He would have summoned 10 trillion burned corpses and marched them through the Soul Society if necessary, and he would have let his Bankai burn until nothing remained standing. The Yamamoto who fought Yhwach in the present day held back. Not consciously maybe, but somewhere in his psyche 1,000 years of civilization had taught him that some prices weren't worth paying, that some victories weren't worth the cost. And here's the truth, Prime Yamamoto, the monster in the painting, would have paid any price to win. And this is exactly what I think the Hell Arc is going to show us, a version of Yamamoto that the Soul Society was never meant to see again, the founder of the Gotei 13 in his most terrifying form. No Shinigami born in the last 1,000 years ever surpassed Yamamoto, but the Yamamoto that they knew, he was already a shadow of what came before. Prime Yamamoto wasn't just the strongest Shinigami who ever lived, he was the reason every other Shinigami needed to exist in the first place, because without him there wouldn't have been nothing left to protect. So instead of asking how strong was Prime Yamamoto, we have to wonder, is Kubo ever going to show us anything that resembles the prime version of this character? The Hell Arc represents the first real opportunity in the franchise's history to explore what Yamamoto was before peace changed him. We may even get additional glimpses of younger Yamamoto during Core 4 of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. But until then, we are only left with fragments and silhouettes in paintings. Let me know your thoughts about Prime Head Captain Yamamoto. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.